Hi everyone, and welcome back to Retro Legends. In the mid-1990s, the video game industry was going through a period of profound transition. The 16-bit era had reached its technical peak. Mascots dominated marketing, and Sega and Nintendo were dividing up the global market. Then Sony arrived. PlayStation versus Saturn wasn't just a clash between two consoles. It was a confrontation between two industrial visions, between a new, hungry, and strategically sharp company and an established player trying to defend its position in a market changing faster than anyone expected. That competition didn't just decide a winner, it redefined the balance of power, development models, and the very future of the medium. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Let's get started. The Saturn was thought up when Sega was still really trusted in business, especially in North America and Europe. The Mega Drive had sold a lot of units, had a good way to get products to stores, and people knew its brand because of strong ads and a style that was for older players than its rivals. So this new console wasn't a big new plan. It was more like an upgrade in tech to keep its strong spot in the market. The first choices they made showed this way of thinking. They focused on keeping things similar to arcade games, which was an area where Sega was really good and had all the right tools. The main goal was to make sure the games looked and played just like the arcade versions, and to make popular game types even better, instead of trying to completely change how video games worked. They didn't start by looking at big changes in the market. Instead, they just figured that what was working now would keep working for the next group of consoles. PlayStation had a very different journey. The end of the agreement with Nintendo wasn't just a breakup of a contract, but a total change in what Sony wanted to achieve in this area. Going from making an add-on to making its own game system meant a complete change in their plan. It was no longer about helping someone else's system, but about building their very own. This included everything from the parts inside to the games, and even how they talked to people all over the world. This big change needed a design that stood out right from the start. Sony didn't have to protect old users or copy a system that already worked. They had to create something new, something believable, and something that could compete in a market already full of big players. So, their way of doing things was more flexible and not held back by old technology choices. In these early days, a big difference started to show. Saturn acted like it was just continuing what the company always did, trying to make an already successful thing even more successful. PlayStation was born as a smart move, aiming to change the rules of how people got into and made things in the industry. This first difference affected not just the parts inside the console, but the whole way the industry was set up, which would decide who won the competition. The design of the Saturn showed what Sega thought was important for technology in the early 90s. Arcades were still a big moneymaker for the company. Many of their best games used fancy sprites, smooth animations, and lots of layers. So, the hardware was built to be really good at handling 2D graphics. It had special chips for dealing with layers, making things bigger or smaller, and spinning them around. When 3D graphics became super important, especially after seeing what other companies were showing off, the plan for the Saturn changed a lot. Adding a second main processor wasn't just making it bigger, it was a fix for a problem. The idea was to split up the work between two parts, giving each part specific jobs to do. But this setup made things really complicated. The two main processors had to constantly talk to each other. And since there weren't good tools for making games yet, it was hard to use all the power of the console. Game makers had to manually split up tasks, making sure calculations and graphics worked together across different parts. How well it worked really depended on how good the team making the game was with technology. The The PlayStation, though, was built in a more straightforward way. The main computer chip handled most of the work, helped by a special graphics part for making 3D shapes. The way it worked was more direct. Changing, lighting, and drawing things followed a clear path that was easy to understand and written down. This difference changed how long it took to learn. Game makers could get good results pretty quickly on PlayStation, while on the Saturn, it took a lot more effort to make things work well. Just because a system was powerful on paper didn't mean it was easy to make games for. The comparison wasn't just about the technical details. The most important thing was how easy the system's design was to use. In a time when 3D needed a lot of trying new things and quick changes, how simple it was to work with gave it a real edge over others. The Saturn's debut in Japan happened at a good time. Sega still had a strong name in its home country, especially because it was so good at making arcade games. The first few weeks went well, thanks to games that looked great and marketing that talked about how powerful the system was and how much it was like arcade games. In Japan, this was exactly what people wanted. They were used to awesome 2D games and specific types of games like fighting games. Things changed a lot in the United States. The early launch, which was announced out of the blue, messed up how things were supposed to be sold. Only a few big stores got the first systems, and other stores were left out at the beginning. This made stores that had supported Sega before really mad right away. Because there weren't enough systems and they weren't spread out evenly, they couldn't reach everyone across the country. Also, there weren't as many games at launch as people thought there would be, which made the early launch less exciting. The surprise launch didn't make up for the problems with getting systems to stores and keeping good relationships with them. PlayStation came into the American market with a completely different plan. Sony stuck to its planned release date, set up a big launch event, and made a lot of buzz during E3 in 1995. They announced the price, which was lower than the Saturn's, in a simple and clear way, making it easy for everyone to remember. The message was clear: a console made for 3D games, affordable, and with tools for other companies to make games for it. This mix quickly changed what people were saying about it. In just a few months, what people thought about the market changed from just comparing how good the tech was to looking at how easy it was to get, its price, and how many games it had. How they handled the launch really helped make this change happen. Getting help from other companies became a super important part of how the competition played out. During a time when technology was changing fast, independent studios and outside publishers had to think carefully about where to put their money, people, and time. Choosing which game system to make games for wasn't just about how powerful it was. It was also about how easy and affordable it was to make games for. The Saturn needed really careful planning to make games that looked good, especially in 3D. Because it split up tasks among many processors and did things at the same time, it took longer to learn how to make games for it. For a medium-sized company, this meant it cost more to make games, and it was harder to know when they would be finished. The difference between a game made really well for the Saturn and one that was just okay was huge, which made it riskier for businesses. PlayStation, on the other hand, offered a more predictable environment. Development kits were relatively easy to get, the instructions were clearer, and the way things worked fit well with the new 3D graphics that were becoming popular. Game studios could guess how long things would take and how much they would cost more accurately, which meant fewer mistakes. This was super important for companies that sold games in many different places at the same time. Sony made this even stronger by making special deals. The rules for using their stuff were set up to get lots of partners, making it easier for them to join in and encouraging them to make games only for PlayStation or to release them there first. The console slowly became the go-to place for new game ideas and for new kinds of games, like 3D role-playing games and action games that felt like movies. You could really see the effect of all this. As time went on, PlayStation offered more and more different kinds of games. Having so many games not only gave customers more choices, but it also made the PlayStation seem like a lively and growing place for games. People started to think of the console as always having new things coming out, which created a good cycle where more games meant more people buying the console, and more people buying the console meant more games. When it came to 2D graphics, the Saturn was in a good spot. Its design allowed it to handle many sprites at once, and it could do cool things like scaling and rotating images right on the hardware. Plus, it had great control over different background layers. This meant that arcade games converted to the Saturn looked really close to the originals. The animations were smooth, and the game responded quickly. Fighting games, which were super popular in arcades back then, really shined on the Saturn because of this setup. They kept their great looks and precise controls. However, the way the Saturn was built wasn't really made for 3D graphics to be its main thing. To make 3D graphics, it needed a bunch of processors and graphics chips working together, but they didn't have a single easy way to talk to each other. So to make good 3D games, developers had to manually tell each part what to do, making sure all the math and drawing steps were perfectly coordinated. If they didn't spend a lot of time fine-tuning everything, the games might not have looked as good as people hoped. The PlayStation, even though it had clear technical problems like textures looking weird when you looked at them from an angle and didn't have fancy smoothing, still had a more straightforward way of making 3D graphics. Making and drawing the shapes followed a clear set of steps, which made it easier to create complicated 3D worlds without a huge learning curve. Kind of like learning to make homemade pasta. This meant more games could be made entirely in 3D. The difference wasn't just about how good the graphics looked, but also how easy it was to get the same results every time, like having a recipe that always works. On PlayStation, even game studios that weren't super big could make good and consistent 3D games. But on the Saturn, making full use of 3D needed really good skills and more time, like carving a statue out of marble. These things made it harder for the Saturn to have as many 3D games. At a time when people were getting more and more interested in 3D worlds and new ways to play games, the way the technology worked was more important than how perfect the 2D graphics were. The market liked the system that seemed to be moving towards the future, even if it had some clear technical flaws. The Saturn's game library showed Sega's way of making games and what was important in the Japanese market. It focused on game types that were very popular in arcades, like fighting games and scrolling shooters, and making arcade games work on home consoles. This way of doing things made sure that these specific types of games were really good, with strong performance and looking a lot like their arcade versions. In Japan, this made sense because people there really liked these kinds of games. Having games that felt like the arcade was a big plus and helped sell a lot of consoles at first. But in places like America and Europe, people were starting to want different kinds of games, especially story-based 3D games and games made for a wider group of players. PlayStation slowly built up a game library that had more and more different kinds of games. Besides 3D action games, the console also welcomed big Japanese role-playing games, sports games, simulation games, adventure games, and Western games made for grown-ups. This mix of games didn't come from just one way of thinking about what games to make, but from being open to different game makers and new types of games. Having so many different games changed how people saw the brand. PlayStation wasn't known for just one type of player, but as a general platform that could have all sorts of games. This encouraged new players to join in, especially those who liked games that weren't usually found in arcades. It turned out that having a lot of different games directly helped sell more consoles. A bigger game library meant it didn't rely on just one type of game, and it made it more likely that different kinds of people would find games they liked. In the long run, this variety helped get more people interested and made the console stronger in the market. The big difference between about 9 million units for the Saturn and over 100 million for the PlayStation wasn't just about market share. It was about how well each company's business plan could last. How many units were sold directly affected how things were made, how they were delivered, and how much money could be invested. Having a lot of consoles out there created a good cycle. More consoles sold meant other companies were more interested, and they would make more games, which made the PlayStation even more popular. Sony was able to get good deals with game makers and sellers, building a system where the console, games, and advertising all worked together smoothly. Reaching 100 million units wasn't just a cool number. It helped them make things cheaper because they were making so many, which let them lower prices without losing money. The console stayed popular for many years, lasting a long time and making the most money possible from their investment. The Saturn, on the other hand, never got enough people to buy it to keep things going. Because fewer people owned a Saturn, other companies slowly stopped making games for it, which meant even fewer new games came out. Having fewer games made people buy even fewer consoles. It was a bad cycle that was hard to stop. When it came to money, Sega started to feel the effects of their past choices, like spending a lot of money and not getting the results they hoped for in important markets. Investors saw Sega losing to Sony as a sign that Sega was falling behind for good. Even their business partners, seeing how well PlayStation was doing, slowly started to focus more on Sony. The difference between the two game systems completely changed how the game industry worked. Sony became a strong and lasting player in making game consoles, while Sega became weak. This weakness would affect Sega's big decisions for years to come. The problems inside Sega weren't just about how things were done, day to day. They were also about different big ideas between the Japanese main office and the American branch. After the Mega Drive did really well in the West, Sega of America got a lot more power to make its own choices. They developed their own way of thinking about the American market. But with the Saturn, control largely went back to Japan, which meant the American team had less freedom. Their main goals didn't always match up. How they handled the early launch in the United States really showed how much their communication and planning were out of sync. Decisions made by the main office weren't smoothly put together with what the local distribution needed. This caused a lot of confusion for both their business partners and inside the company itself. Even with marketing, the message wasn't as clear as it was for the previous generation. Sega had built a strong, bold identity in the 90s. But with the Saturn, their message got messy. The switch from 2D to 3D wasn't told as one clear story, and the ads changed a lot between different markets without a clear direction. Sony chose a more central way to set up its brand's identity. PlayStation was shown as a worldwide brand, with all its messages working together in different places. The way it looked, the logo, the ads, and how it fit into culture all followed the same path. This helped create a steady and easy-to-spot image. The different ways they were set up showed up in the market. A mixed-up plan made their sales efforts less strong and made it harder to react fast to changes. But having one clear plan made it easier for the product, the messages, and how it was sold to all work together. In a very competitive world, being consistent inside became a real advantage, directly making people trust and like it more. PlayStation helped set new rules that would become super important for future generations of gaming. Focusing on 3D wasn't just a technical choice, it was a smart business move. The console was shown off as a place for big 3D experiences, complex worlds, and new kinds of interactive stories. This direction made developers focus on 3D, and it became the main way games were made in the mid-90s. Working with other companies was another big standard. Sony made a system where outside studios weren't just making games for them, but were important partners in the whole PlayStation world. Easy-to-use development kits, fair licensing rules, and good technical support helped a constant flow of new games come out. The console slowly became the go-to place for new game ideas and growing game types. Global marketing finished the picture. PlayStation wasn't just advertised as a cool gadget, but as a cultural brand for a wide audience, including young adults. The way they talked about it stayed the same everywhere, making a strong and recognizable identity that lasted a long time. The Saturn, on the other hand, showed the problems with a plan that wasn't really well put together. The powerful hardware, in theory, didn't automatically make it a strong competitor. Without easy-to-use tools for making games and good teamwork between different parts of the company, it was hard to really use all the technical power of the system. The complex design made it harder to create games, which meant fewer games that could really show off what the system could do. The fight between these two consoles was a big turning point for the gaming world. Sega slowly started to step back from making hardware, while Sony became super strong and stayed at the top, changing the whole industry for years to come. So, this battle didn't just decide who won in sales, it also set up how future game consoles would be made and how the whole business would work. The fight between PlayStation and Saturn showed a big change between two eras in the industry. It wasn't just a fight between products, it was a shift in how game consoles were thought about, made, and supported over time. The consoles before this time really focused on their brand name and making their own games. But with 3D games coming out, the focus changed to making platforms that were open and could grow. The Saturn found itself in a time when technology was changing super fast. The company tried to make an old way of doing things fit into a new world. They kept their arcade roots in an already complicated way of working. The choices they made showed they wanted to keep their old identity instead of making a new one. PlayStation, on the other hand, came into the market without any old baggage from past consoles. Their goal wasn't to protect what they had, but to win new ground. They focused on 3D as the main way to play, making sure other companies could make games for them and building a consistent global brand. All of this was planned from the very start. The console wasn't just sold as a piece of hardware, but as the main part of a whole connected system. The outcome of that fight wasn't because one side was just meant to win. It was all thanks to choices made in how things were built, how the company was run, and how they sold their products. These choices added up over time. Things like how simple the system was, how well they managed their brand, and their plan to work with other companies all gave them a growing edge in the long run. After that competition, the gaming world never went back to how it was before. The role of other game makers, how important having a lot of users was, and how central 3D graphics became, all turned into the new normal for future game systems. So the fight between PlayStation and Saturn marked a turning point. From then on, the industry worked differently, focusing more on the whole system rather than just one game. And with that, our trip down memory lane comes to an end. How many of these fun facts did you already know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell to get notifications for more trips into the world of retro gaming. Thanks for watching Retro Legends, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends.
Here we go now, kick, punch, block.